Okay, the recording is on. We're gonna start at 4:15, so we'll have a little bit of banter until then. You might hear some background noise. That's because I am not in my dorm, which is the most quiet place to be in, unless you guys heard my roommates in the background last session. It's my bad. They are uncontrollable people. But you might hear some background noise because every now and then there's commute. My day's okay. Hello. We're gonna wait for a little while. I did start the event a little early because I usually like to have 5 minutes in advance, give people a little while and let them trickle in. This lecture is going to end at 5:45 flat. Sharp, not flat. Reason why is I actually have a work light to get to, and the place where I'm at is actually not very far from that work light. But I want to do a cutoff real quick. So initially I wanted to go through 3.2 to all the way to 3.6, but I felt like maybe it would have been better to leave off with a cliffhanger, perhaps. So we're only going through 3.2 and 3.5. So it's gonna be relatively short to compared to past review sessions, which is 2. We've only done 2. Both of them were 2 hours, but this will be 1.5 hours. Maybe even shorter depending on how fast. It's not really a cliffhanger, more like a letdown, because the content after the revolution is relatively boring. I don't know, some people say it's boring. It's okay. It's not my favorite part of US history. Yeah, you're gonna learn it, just not today. That's going to be Friday. So starting from this unit all the way down to unit 8 is gonna be, there's gonna be a lot of topics. So I've decided to split units 3 through 8 into 2 lectures each, just for the sake of not yapping about US history for like 4 to 5 hours. I don't have that energy. I'm sorry. Looks like we're getting closer to 4:15. It's all good. So it is 4:15, which means that we are going to start. For anyone who isn't here at the beginning, it's okay. This lecture is going to be recorded as always. So today we're going to start on Unit 3, which is 1754 to 1800. Today we're going to actually stop at 1781, which is the end of the American Revolution. So we're going to focus on the build-up and the actual war itself. So about us, this is the 3rd time we're going to talk about this again. I prepared this review session as a part of 5 Hive, and I am a volunteer. You can consider joining and check out the website. It's not fully finished. We are still working on it. But yeah. While we're here, here's the feedback survey. There will be a link and the QR code at the end of the questions. I'll give you guys 2 seconds to get that in, and I'm sure one of the 5 Hive members will be in here to make sure that you guys get the feedback survey every now and then. Another disclaimer, AP is a trademark of College Board. Of course, they do not endorse us because they are not affiliated with us. So that's it. Expectations are usual, be respectful. The lecture is being recorded, so you don't have to stay. This is like a college class, you don't have to stay throughout the entire lecture. And again, always bump your question if I haven't seen it. Okay, so today's agenda, as I already mentioned, for some of you who are coming in just now, we have a shorter agenda for today, mainly because the lecture time is shorter, and I think it's just better to leave off at the American Revolution and talk about the more quote-unquote boring stuff on Friday when we have a lot more time. Any questions about the agenda or anything before we get started with the content? Also, I apologize if I sound a little quiet. I am outside. So, no questions on the agenda. Sounds good. So we're going to jump into the content. So 3.2, that was weird. I almost said T. 3.2, it's the 7 Years' War, also known as the French and Indian War, if you are a colonist in the Americas. So first things first, we kind of have to contextualize the 7 Years' War, mainly caused by colonial rivalry in North America, between whom, hopefully you guys know, the British and the French. And the main region of conflict is going to be in the Ohio River Valley. So if you look in the map here, it was mainly for the proclamation of 1763. The little general colored area that's like orange, that's a general vague area that the French and the British will be concerned with. And the reason why we have kind of conflict over the Ohio Valley is that most of the land up here in the north will be used up by colonists. And so more people will want to expand westward, and that entails going west into the Ohio River Valley. What the colonists will do, they will set up the Ohio Company. Basically, they will give land grants to people, and they will just go on down there, encroach on the land, and just establish their own settlements. Of course, as you might imagine, the French don't like that because they also claim this area, and the British are effectively claiming this area. So this kind of expansion against the French, as well as native villages, will kind of establish sort of a powder keg. And this powder keg is going to explode when we have an incident involving a certain George Washington regarding matters with Fort Duquesne, where a French officer will die and war will officially break out. Now, you don't need to know how the 7 Years' War went. What you mainly have to know is that it started off that way because of colonial rivalry between France and Britain, and you only need to know how it ended. So the Treaty of Paris in 1763, not to be confused with another Treaty of Paris and another Treaty of Paris in history. I think there are like 4 important treaties in Paris. The dictates of Treaty of Paris are going to mainly involve territorial claims. So what Britain will gain will be French Canada, and as well as Spanish Florida. And I feel like I failed to mention this, but yes, Florida was a Spanish colony at this time. Not anymore. After 1763, it is British. Their loss. Now, France won't absolutely lose everything like Louisiana and Canada. They will actually be returned territories in the West Indies and those territories are going to be Guadeloupe and Martinique. And today, those territories are still part of France. They are overseas departments. The reason why France kept those territories as opposed to a giant piece of Canada was that, sugar. Sugar was really nice for them. And they will continue to exploit sugar plantations in the Americas. Spain was also involved, and Spain will actually gain some stuff aside from losing Florida. They will inherit Louisiana from the French, but they will also get 2 other territories that will be much more relevant when we discuss the Spanish-American War, and that will be the Philippines and Cuba. That's all you really have to know about the Treaty of Paris, but you will have to know about the aftermath and the costs of the war. It bankrupted both Britain and France. Um, Now, we're not going to be concerned with France for now, because that's a matter of the French Revolution, but we will have to be concerned with the financial crisis in Britain. And the reason why we have a kind of financial crisis in Britain is that war is really expensive. You need to build ships, you need to raise armies. Um, Always in a time of war, for the most part, you will be losing some kind of money. That's why a lot of states want to try to avoid war. The second reason, which is secondary, is people and population. And kind of the big factor into the financial crisis is the fact that the 7 Years' War was kind of our first world war. It was the first war that kind of was fought all over the world. Not only was it fought in the Americas, known as the French and Indian War, it was also fought in Europe between Britain, Prussia, France, and Spain. It was also fought in Asia, mainly in India. The French initially had a holding in India, but they would eventually lose it in that time. In addition, Britain was spending a lot of money on other wars that happened before the 7 Years' War, that being the War of Spanish Succession, the War of Jenkins' Ear, don't ask me why it's named that, and King George's War. Those are three wars, and this is the fourth war of the century. So as you might imagine, national debt is not looking so good. In After the fall of the French in America, this is going well in colonist mind. They say, "Oh, that's great. We get to move over west." Well, Native Americans will think, "Okay, they're threatening our autonomy. We have to react to this." And one of the major reaction is going to be Pontiac's rebellion. And here I included a depiction of Pontiac kind of rallying natives to fight. Pontiac's rebellion is going to break out in 1763. And it will be around for a while, but it's not going to make too much headway. Again, how Pontiac's rebellion was, how it played out is not the most important thing. You just need to know that Native Americans responded to westward expansion and threatened autonomy with violence. Now, Britain will react to Pontiac's rebellion with the proclamation of 1763, and this is one of the first kind of important things to start looking at in terms of colonists being a little bit rebellious. What the proclamation of 1763 did, it was essentially drew a line, and I included a map of that line here, going along the Appalachian Mountains. It also dictated that private individuals were not able to buy any land west of the Appalachian Mountains. That privilege was only reserved for colonial governments. Now, as you might imagine, this kind of failed because colonists just did it illegally, and no one really stopped them from doing so. You will also need to know about the reactions of colonists to Pontiac's rebellion, mainly violence. And probably the most notable example will be in Pennsylvania. If you remember from Unit 2, Pennsylvania is kind of the one colony that was considered the holy experiment. It was supposed to be religiously and ethnically tolerant of all people, including natives, Protestants, Catholics. It was founded by the Quaker William Penn. But by this time, effectively in the 1770s, it will kind of lose that experiment. That holy experiment is going to come to an end when the Paxton Boys, a group of Scots-Irish, not colonists, but a group of Scots-Irish immigrants in Pennsylvania will go out and kill a bunch of Native Americans living in Pennsylvania, known as the Conestoga. The only thing you need to really know is just that the fact they're called the Paxton Boys, and that their reaction kind of led to the expulsion of natives. In some ways, the Paxton Boys, they were a little bit similar to Bacon's Rebellion, right? Bacon's Rebellion wanted to be more aggressive on Native Americans. They wanted to expand westward as well. Paxton Boys will believe in a similar policy as well. Now, finally, the last thing you should know is that before the 7 Years' War, colonists weren't exactly unified under a single national identity. They just saw themselves as, oh, I'm from Massachusetts, or even I'm from Boston, or I'm from Plymouth. Specific things like that. After the war, they're going to feel some form of unity. They were united in a war against France. Um, and one attempt at kind of making this unity come to fruition or being realized was the Albany Plan of Union, which was proposed in 1754 by Benjamin Franklin. And the cartoon associated with this kind of plan is here, Join or Die. As you notice, this is a snake split it up into the colonies, well, most of the colonies. Um, and unfortunately, unfortunately for Benjamin Franklin, this union is going to be rejected by the colonies, and it will not be sent to the British. But it is the first kind of instance, the first development we see of a colonial identity among the Americans. And from now on, I think I'm just going to start referring to colonists as Americans, because they will start to feel that kind of national identity, and that is one of the key topics in this unit. Any questions about the 7 Years' War? The recording will be posted on the lecture calendar that Lance posted in announcements. Yes, taxes. The costs of the 7 Years' War will have to be repaid with taxes. And we're going to cover that in 3.3, which is iconically called taxation without representation. How important is it to know all the specific dates? Not absolutely important. What you need to know is just the general timeline where they vaguely are. So if you're looking at period 3, 1754, basically you should vaguely know that the French and Indian War, or the 7 Years' War, was 1754 to some kind of date, like a decade later, give or take. Probably the easiest way to remember when the French and Indian War ended is remember the Proclamation of 1763, because that is ingrained in the title of the policy. But everything else, like the Albany Plan of Union, you don't need to know the date. You just need to know that kind of historical development, right? Key point is the historical developments, and the content will mainly be like points of evidence. It should be mentioned that in APUSH, an AP World, this class is generally like an introduction to U.S. history. It is not like a specialized class. So you won't need to know every single detail I give you. These are mainly examples and kind of illustrative examples and details. One more question, and we will move on to 3.3. Or comment. That's fine. It sure feels specialized. Yeah, in some ways. It's generally okay to have more details under your belt. Whenever you are like on the DBQ or the LEQ, right? It might be useful to know a few extra details for evidence beyond document. But we will go over the CED specifically at the end. Hopefully we'll have time. Actually, do we have time? We might not have time. Friday we will go over the CED. Okay. Let's move on to 3.3. Yes. Taxation without representation. So let's talk about what the British did to respond to those costs. Taxes. That's about it. But the idea of taxes is another kind of reassertion of imperial authority. You might remember from Unit 2, we discussed the Navigation Acts. Again, that was the British attempt at regulating trade in America. And it was not consistently enforced. In fact, we see salutary neglect throughout. Now, the first the first legislations or policies that we're going to see is going to be the Sugar Act, the Revenue Act, which is part of the Sugar Act, and the Currency Act. So the Sugar Act was a tax on sugar, the Revenue Act was a revenue tax, and the Currency Act dictated that Americans could not, mess around with their own currency. Basically, it was a way of regulating trade and standardizing trade with England. Um, Obviously, um, this is not going to sit well with a specific group of people, mainly merchants. This is going to hurt merchants more than the average American colonist. What will happen, though, a year after, is going to be the Stamp Act. Now, this Stamp Act is really important because this virtually hurts everybody, whether or not you're a farmer, a merchant, a really wealthy person, wealthy member of the colonial gentry. You are going to effectively be forced to pay this kind of tax, because what the Stamp Act was all about was print material, publications, newspapers, court documents. It virtually touched every kind of class and occupation in the colonies. And this is going to bring up the idea of colonial consent versus virtual representation. Now, from the colonist side, they thought that they had to give consent to Britain for these taxes. It was not the fact that these taxes existed, but the fact that they were being imposed. Now, for the British, they will respond, well, you are being represented. You are just being, even though you don't have direct representatives in Parliament, you're virtually being represented. Now, of course, this logic is not going to be persuasive for the colonists, and so they're going to form the Stamp Act Congress, and basically what the Stamp Act Congress is going to be doing is it's going to publish its grievances and tell Parliament, hey, you're breaking your duties, you're not actually being useful. Since when has Parliament been useful? For now and then. They're also going to be forming committees of correspondences. And what these committees are going to be doing is coordinating, acts of covert resistance. For example, they're going to be coordinating non-importation agreements. So non-importation agreements is another way of saying boycott. They're not going to import English goods. They're going to prefer other foreign goods. And this is going to be disadvantage for Britain as a whole, because the whole mercantilist idea is that you only trade with the mother country, you get more exports than imports. Effectively, the way Britain will respond is going to be the Declaratory Act, and it doesn't really do anything other than say, hey, we are your mother country, we have the authority, shut up, let us do our stuff. And then immediately after that, 1 year, they're going to pass the Townshend Acts, named after Townshend. What these Townshend Acts, all you need to know is that it's an expansion of taxes to a lot of other goods in Americas. Americans will not respond very well to this. Ultimately, in 1770, you don't need to know the specific date, but you do need to know that the Boston Massacre will be a huge factor. Initially, it started off as kind of a rally of protests in front of a specific building in Boston, and eventually, the actual event will take place. And what colonists are going to do is they're going to dramatize this event. So I included the engraving by Paul Revere, mainly because of the portrayal of the British, or the Redcoats, intentionally killing colonists. What particularly happened in that massacre, you should know, that they thought that someone said shoot, but no one actually there's no evidence that anyone gave that command. In fact, the person who kind of let them go scot-free was John Adams, who was a colonist who didn't like Britain, eventually won't like Britain at all. In 1773, they'll pass another tax. So you would think that after the Boston Massacre, you'd think that Britain would maybe reconsider their approach, but it keeps on coming. Colonists will obviously respond to that with the Boston Tea Party. And they will actually form their first Continental Congress. Basically, what that was all about is to publish another list of grievances to the king. Again, they will ignore it, and they will publish the Intolerable Acts, pass the Intolerable Acts. And what the Intolerable Acts will do is respond, first of all, to the Boston Tea Party with the Boston Port Bill and the Government Bill. and also the Administration of Justice Act. So what those three did was that they effectively closed down Boston. They took over the charter, revoked the charter effectively, and they impeached effectively any kind of colonial authorities that were originally elected by the Americans. They were also comprised of the Quartering Act, which meant that British military could occupy residences. Obviously, this is going to reach a tipping point um, when we see the Second Continental Congress, but we will reserve that for much later. We're going to have to talk about kinds of activists and movements. So I've mentioned the Boston Tea Party that was organized by the Sons of Liberty, but I also need to mention the Daughters of Liberty, because I'm not misogynistic. The importance of the Sons of Liberty, they coordinated such boycotts and stuff like that. But the Daughters of Liberty, what they would do is that they would help those boycotts by helping produce clothing, right? One of the key things that they wanted to boycott was clothes from Britain. Well, if you don't get clothes from Britain, how else are you going to get them? Well, just make our own. It's that simple. Another group that might be interesting for you guys to do your research on are the Green Mountain Boys. Basically, a bunch of people in Vermont who told Britain to not touch their stuff. They're not particularly important. The main important groups are going to be Sons of Liberty and the Daughters of Liberty. Any questions about kind of that build-up? I didn't really hype it up because it kind of is boring. It's just Britain taxing over and over and Americans just screaming at them, why do you not get the idea? Now you don't have to memorize every single act they passed. Just know that they were doing it over and over. Understandable? Okay. Well, we're going to move on to a piece of analysis. So I mentioned a document. It's a little long. So it's titled The Declarations of Rights and Grievances, and this is going to be by the space is wrong there. It's going to be by the Stamp Act Congress in 1765. So I only put 3 parts instead of 4, because it is a pretty long document, and it is also relatively hard to read because of the formatting. So I'll give you guys. Does 5 minutes sound good? Maybe let's extend it to 7 minutes. It's a pretty long blurb of text, especially given the language. Might not be quite easy to read. So I'll give you guys 7 minutes to read the document and then type out your responses. So right now it's 4:39. We will be back at 4:46. Of course, as always, you can ask any questions about anything while I'm here. Oh, hey, Aaron. Oh, they left. I'm going to disable truncation. There we go. I'm on the road and the screen share isn't loading. Oh no, okay. Thank you, Insomnia. It's a little tiny. I had to fit it onto the slides. Initially I just wanted to give you guiding questions, but formatting never worked out. For the people at home, also, for now, I won't be able to see your messages because it is a little tiny. Um, so, I will not be able to see the chat until 4:46. Give people an opportunity to read. Let's start looking at responses, seeing progress. People are still working. Now, for those of you who are thinking that the answers to these questions are going to be exclusive for 3.2 and 3.3, not exactly. It's a warm up for 3.4, which will involve the Enlightenment. So you can talk about the Enlightenment as well. Okay. I could just check the time here. Looks like class is ending for some students here, so I will have to apologize if you guys hear background noises at home and here as well. Okay. One minute left. Please start posting your responses in the chat. Okay. And we will start going through your responses at 4:46. It is 4:46. Hopefully we'll see some responses. Do you guys need more time to finish up your response? Hmm. I'm getting no feedback, so a little? Okay. Maybe 1 to 2 minutes then. Is everyone good with 1 to 2 minutes? Okay, good. Um, I'll give you guys 1 to 2 minutes extra. I understand it is a little long. So we'll reconvene at 4:48. Well, I'll read through your things at 4:48. Not reconvene. It is 4:48. Will we need more time again? Lucy's one person has posted their response. Um, you'd like to edit your answer? No problem. Give you time to do that then. Oh, thank God for noise suppression. That was really loud. Um, okay. Uh, anyone else? Do they need any more time with this analysis? I'm seeing some good points in the chat, so it's very promising. Is there anyone who doesn't have um sorry. Is there anyone who needs much more time to copy and paste or to finish up or edit a detail? Let me check. It has been edited, so it worked. Well, we have 3 responses, so we do have some material to work with. So let's read through for part A. So taxation without representation. You can also talk about the consent of governed. Popular sovereignty. That is a principle of government. Let me make sure that it is. The section I'm thinking of should be in there. Yes, it is in there. Um, they make the case for the underlying principle of having some form of self-representation within government. Yes, good. All good answers. Let's look at part B. In the perspective of the British, what would justify the grievances and why? French and Indian War was costly. Britain believed it was fought on behalf of the colonists as well. Very good. In the mainland, it is natural that citizens pay taxes. Considering both this and the fact that the colonists benefited as a result, Britain believed that it was justified. Yes. British recovering from the French. Taxes paid help pay it back. Yep. And they had fought the war on behalf of the colonists without them bearing the brunt of the costs. It would for a sufficient contextualization. That's the point of this part. It would have been better if you also added the detail that they, regardless of whether or not they, you know, did experience the cost themselves, they need to pay it back as well. But it is a fair, yes, French and Indian War. But I understood what you meant, so that's okay. Part C, how might a historian use the source? This is the historical thinking part. Historian could use this document to illustrate a piece of writing preceding the Articles of Confederation Constitution, which still held very good. Colonists' reaction to taxation without representation foreshadowed the Revolutionary War. In some ways, at this point, in 1765, the call for independence is not going to be very strong. We will talk about kind of the urge for that in the next section, but not exactly yet. In fact, the colonists were a little bit attached. They thought that they could negotiate. There was the Olive Branch Petition. A historian could use this source when writing about governing principles by using it to support for inherent responsibilities of governing body towards their citizens. Do you mean that Americans valued that kind of governing principle, the idea that there's inherent responsibilities in a governing body? That was what you were going for? Yeah, good point. All good responses. Yeah, so guys demonstrated strong understanding. So let's move on to 3.4. Philosophical foundations of the American Revolution. We're not gonna yap too much about this because some of you guys may have taken AP Gov, some of you guys may have taken AP World, and the Enlightenment is really covered in both of those courses. Now, if you have taken neither of them, this is where you're going to be learning some new stuff. But hopefully this is just straight review. So the Enlightenment is an era, is also known as the Age of Reason. And I already mentioned this in previous units. It's based on rationalism and puricism, and cosmopolitanism. Basically, the idea is that you have to think, use your brain cells, as well as, use observations and be kind of cognizant of your place in the world. And part of the things that will come out of the Enlightenment, being the principles that we are concerned about, will be consent of the governed, popular sovereignty, natural rights, social contracts, all of the important things that make the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, enlightened, so to speak. So, publications of the Enlightenment texts, such as The Social Contract by Jean-Jacques Rousseau, Leviathan by Thomas Hobbes, will influence the majority of the colonial gentry and wealthy enough people, such as merchants, who could afford such publications. But at the same time, this will all be regurgitated, so to speak, to every single colonist. So if you were a farmer, you would start to see the rise of pamphlets. Probably the most important one is going to be Common Sense, because it is. I mean, it was like the first best grossing piece of literature in American history. Um, Now, what Common Sense does go over is the same kind of ideas of the Declaration of Independence. This time, the aim of Common Sense was to persuade people towards the idea that we should go for independence, and that will be the exigence for the Declaration of Independence, which will, of course, involve the Second Continental Congress in 1774. Another thing that I also want to bring up a point on is religious sermons. Religious sermons will also play a part in idealizing liberty, and probably one example of a sermon that illustrates this is called A Chariot of Liberty. Basically, the idea is that God has given us our natural rights. We are born with natural rights, and government should not take that away from us. So now, not only do you have a kind of philosophical and rational reasoning behind natural rights, but you also kind of have a religious foundation. And sometimes a lot of people say that religion is philosophical, and in some ways it is. I also, just to really hit home the idea of publications and newspapers being important in spreading ideals of liberty and the Enlightenment, engraving from a Pennsylvania magazine. Was really common throughout newspapers as well. Any questions about this part? Or are we free to move on pretty quickly? I'm getting no feedback right now, so I think it is someone's typing. No questions? All right, we are going to move on to the actual oh, no, not yet. MCQ, sorry. I thought I put only 2 questions, but 3 questions, I guess. So I'm going to read out the MCQ. I'll give you guys maybe 2 minutes at most. Which of the following best explains how liberty grew as an American ideal among colonists in 1754 to 1800? Would be better if it says 1776. Increased publications and religious sermons promoted the notion that Americans were entitled to natural rights and liberties. British assertion of authority over colonial consent suppressed Enlightenment ideals in the colonies. The closure of Boston and the provisions of the coercive acts caused colonists to use liberties and freedoms as a rallying cry, or the presence of the Enlightenment thinkers among colonial activists helped spread the ideals of natural rights and the social contract. No need to use spoiler, because I will ask you to justify your answer. Which shouldn't be a thing to scare you guys off, by the way. Any questions on the MCQ maybe that might clarify anything? The answer choices are written on purpose the way they are. And do note that maybe not all of these are great answers, but it is only asking for the best option. I'll give you guys some seconds. I'm not going to quantify how much. 5:02. Maybe that'll be enough time for you guys, or not. Seeing people starting to see choices. A, D, not B. Yes, it is not B. People are convinced that it says D. Seeing some people put in their 2 cents, so we'll give them some time, and then we will walk through it. For those of you who aren't confident in your answer, it's normal. I intended these MCQs to be a lot harder than they will actually be on the A-Push exam. So the majority of people are saying D. Okay, let's break it down. A lot of people are saying D. So, any one of you would like to justify why D? Let's start with a majority opinion first, and we'll break down to other answer choices. Anyone who has picked choice D is welcome to, or change to choice D. Common sense being important in enlightenment and liberty. But does that quite exactly... Let me read choice D again. The presence of enlightenment thinkers among colonial activists helped spread the ideals of natural rights and the social contract. Any other thoughts on why it might be choice D? I did mention specific examples in the last section, right? Common sense is involved because I did mention it recently. No one picked C, so that is correct. It's not explaining much. People ruled out B, that's correct. So it's either between A or D. Let me click on that spoiler. Literature, so this is a justification for A. Literature such as common sense and religious sermons promoted natural rights and liberties. And they asked a question, their faith could also be used to justify the right to be entitled to natural rights and liberties. In some ways, sermons can play a role in saying that it is a God-given right, it is upon birthright that we have certain natural and unalienable rights. directly quoted from the Declaration of Constitution, not Constitution, Declaration of Independence. Let me probe a question for people who picked Part D. Among colonial activists, could you kind of support an argument linking the Enlightenment thinkers to the colonial activists we have discussed so far? So the Sons of Liberty, the Daughters of Liberty, Great Mountain Boys. I know I am taking a little while on this. It's because I'm not getting too much feedback on it. I want to make sure that we are hitting on an important point. It is really dry outside. Well, Thomas Paine is going to be against. So for people who picked Part D, could you write kind of an argument or write a good explanation linking the Enlightenment thinkers in Europe to the same colonial activists such as the Sons of Liberty and the Daughters of Liberty in respect to Enlightenment principles? What did colonial activists primarily do, in other words? I'll give you guys a little bit to think about that. We do have enough time to go over the American Revolution if we spend a little bit of more time on this MCQ. So, because you don't need to know the entirety of war history. Primarily did boycotts and tar and feathering. That's a good point, Unique. That is something they primarily did. They primarily either did boycotts, did kind of public acts, such as the Boston Tea Party, as well as sustaining those boycotts, in the case of the specific case of the Daughters of Liberty and textiles. Would you say that is a direct link with the Enlightenment thinkers in spreading the ideas of natural rights? Yes. So, the key issue, right? So, I purposely made choice D a distractor. I'm sorry, guys. But yes, the first clause, the first part, the presence of Enlightenment thinkers among colonial activists specifically helped spread the ideals of natural rights and social contracts. What word could I change to actually make that a better answer? A better response? Like, ignore the fact that choice A exists. Yeah, the presence of Enlightenment thinkers in Europe. Among? No, not really. I say word choice. I'm implying that it's one word. It could be a phrase. Colonial? No, not really. Yes, the Enlightenment ideas came from European thinkers such as John Locke and Jean-Jacques Rousseau. But in this choice, we are associating them with colonial activists like Sons of Liberty. John Locke and Jean-Jacques Rousseau did not directly think of the idea of direct and not indirect, so to speak. Is it thinkers? Founding fathers? I think that it would be a better way of writing this response would be the presence of Enlightenment thinkers among either colonial leaders or colonial let's see, colonial educated, the educated in the colonies, helped spread the ideals of natural rights. Thomas Paine was well educated. Most of our founding fathers, I'm hoping most, because that is a general trend, were well educated. And what I did mention, maybe I failed to mention this to hammer this point home, but the founding fathers had access to these texts. They were able to understand it, they were able to read it in the first place. And what they would do is that they would help use these ideas to form a pretty darn good rallying cry. And that rallying cry would be liberty. Does that make sense for anyone who picked part D? This was a really hard question, by the way. So if you looked at part A and part D, okay. So part of that might have been on my fault without making that direct link with the colonial gentry. Should remember kind of socioeconomic factors in some ways. So I'll keep that in mind. We're going to move on to 3.5, which is the actual American Revolution. I am not going to go over the military history, mainly because in some ways it's kind of irrelevant. You don't need to know exactly Lexington conquered, Battle of Bunker Hill, which is actually on Breed's Hill, the Battle of New York. You need to know the Battle of Saratoga, the Battle of Trenton, the Battle of Savannah, the Battle of Atlanta, and all that. You just need to know a few key events. It's a lot of battles, yes it is. But if you are interested in the military history, you can go on YouTube for that. But College Board will not ask you a whole lot about military history. They will ask you about developments. So let's first talk about the stinky part, opposition to the American Revolution. So when the American Revolution kicks off, or even before the American Revolution kicks off, we already have opposition. And the opposition is mainly going to come from relatively rich people. I wonder why. Now, the Loyalist opposition will be mainly focused in the South. And in fact, the British will launch a series of campaigns in the South because they believe they had a better chance in that area, where they would be more likely to pick up colonists who were loyalists, right? For the most part, when we were talking about the build-up, the road to revolution, we mainly talked about Boston and New England. And it could be generalizable to New York, Pennsylvania, New England, even though they had their own loyalists. But we didn't really talk much about the South. And that's the reason why. They had a stronger loyalist presence than in the other kinds of colonies. Another thing that might factor into a loyalist thinking might be the balance of power. At this point in time, Britain's on top. They defeated the French. The Spanish Armada is dead. So they're the only colonial power that's really significant in the North America, as well as in Europe. We won't talk about Prussia. And what do the Americans have? Just a bunch of angry men with guns. Militias, right? And some of the militiamen are not going to be well trained. But regardless of the balance of power and loyalist opposition, and the fact that the British did make headway with the loyalists, by the way, I want to clarify that. American leadership and resilience, the attachment to the ideas of liberty and the ideological battle, as well as European support, will be important factors, key factors in the American victory. So let's talk about the leadership, which means we have to talk about George Washington, kind of one of the stars in American history. Now, George Washington was already experienced with military. He was an officer in the French and Indian War. In fact, he was one of the officers involved in the whole incident that kicked off the Seven Years' War. And he's going to be the first and only pick for the Continental Army. George Washington will, he's a smart guy. He was a smart guy. And some of the key ideas behind George Washington is that his leadership and kind of acumen will help win key battles, such as the Battle of Trenton. His leadership will also keep the militia together, especially at Valley Forge after a series of defeats from New York and all that. Another thing about resilience, though, I want to bring home a point, is that they could have given up after a major battle like at New York. But the idea of liberty seemed to be very important for these colonists. Remember that we talked about a religious association with liberty. That was one of the key factors. Now, I will want to bring this point, and maybe a lot of people will disagree with me. I think the European support is the most important. And when I say European support, I'm mainly talking about the French, not because I'm biased about French people. The French were actually initially hesitant in joining the revolution. They thought that the Americans would lose. But going back to the leadership part, certain American generals at the Battle of Saratoga would lead to a key victory. And this was actually the turning point, because this convinced the French that they could invest, quote unquote, or lend their support to the Americans to tell Britain to suck it up. They didn't want to stick one in Britain's face. And to be honest, who doesn't want to do that? I want to do that. Anyways, and so the French will enter after much diplomatic meetings by Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin. And the French will send a series of important commanders. One of them you should know is Marquis de Lafayette. Maybe you guys may have heard of Rochambeau. He is also one of the key officers in the American Revolution. And what they will do is they will actually work very closely with other American leaders. Marquis de Lafayette actually maintained very close relationship with American leadership like Washington and Jefferson. But the key battle you need to know is the Battle of Yorktown, which ended it all in 1781. And part of that was due to the fact that the French Navy and the French Army actually made it impossible for the British to fully retreat. And so the British will realize that this war is a lost cause, and they're going to ultimately surrender and negotiate peace. That's really about it, all you need to know about the American Revolution. Any questions about that? I'm going to move on to an SAQ. I'm seeing no questions about the American Revolution itself. So we're going to move on to the SAQ. This time I shortened it to 4 parts only. So maybe we'll give you guys... Does 8 minutes sound good? Yeah? Okay. 8 minutes. Right now it's 5:20. We will reconvene at 5:28. In the meantime, if you have any questions about the content or the SAQ itself, like what some words mean, you can ask them here. Any questions on anything? Really? About the SAQ or maybe the contents of the SAQ? So government policy can include taxation, yes. So, the reviews I am doing are not going to be one to one for each unit. They're going to only be one to one for units 1, 2, and 9. The rest of them are going to be split up into 2 review sessions. So, there's going to be a part 2 to this, which will be a little bit more content heavy. It is not going to be tomorrow. I already posted all of the events and the times, including my office hours. It will be Friday. It's not going to be at the same time as this one, unfortunately. Um, oh, I should clarify this. I should use the word another colonial response. Um, yeah. For the colonial response, for part B and C, the colonial responses are going to be unique. So part B will talk about one response, and part C will talk about a different response. Thank you for asking that question. Yeah, it should say another. You have a little less than 2 minutes. So hopefully you should be around part C or part D. Looks like it is 5:28, so please post your responses to the SAQ. We are running a little short on time because I want to leave some time for the CED. As these responses are going in, I'll be reading through them in my head. Um, Still gonna edit. Okay. Sure that. It looks like we only have 3 people here. So I'm gonna ask for everyone, please attempt the SAQ. Because I usually like it when I have 3 sample responses to go over. See that you finished your editing. Okay, I'm gonna start reading Insomnia's response out loud. Um, One policy enacted by Britain in colonial North America was the Quartering Act that forced the Americans to quarter troops within their homes. Yep, that is one government policy that has been sufficiently described. Both the Sons of Liberty and Daughters of Liberty supported the boycott of products after they have been taxed, with the Daughters of Liberty supplying some of the clothes and such that have been boycotted. Um, okay, maybe it'd be good to provide an explicit detail with the Sons of Liberty, such as the Boston Tea Party or and anti non-importation, agreements. Another colonial response to British policies was active military resistance towards the British with militia. I think you're referring to the Green Mountain Boys. Yeah, that could be one. Um, I'd accept that at least. One development that contributed to colonial victory was the support of France that they had moved to align themselves with and providing them with weaponry and funding. Okay, good. That's the key point I wanted to assert European support. The Tea Act, yep. Some colonists went as far as the Boston Tea Party as a protest to taxation. The Loyalists, on the other hand, remained loyal to Britain despite being against taxation without representation. Okay, so you're saying that the Loyalists just kind of paid those taxes. Stamp Act was a taxation put on paper. So the Part C was briefly described one other colonial response to British policies. Other should be there. So a boycott, that's technically the Boston Tea Party. So another, you could have also mentioned military resistance like insomnia. D, same point. So very good. Good job, you two. Now is the point in time that we have a Q&A section. Do you guys need the link to the feedback form? Or are you guys good? Okay, hold on. Let me get that up real quick. This might break some stuff. Here you go. Oh, it broke the screen sharing. I don't think that's entirely important. Are there any questions about... Yeah, no, it's fine. Usually I don't expect a lot of people interested in social studies. Any questions on what we covered so far? Maybe any questions on Unit 3? Including the topics we haven't really covered yet. What other groups could you mention? As far as activists go? Other kinds of colonists. Let me see. Let me try to think of one, because I mentioned 3, and that's a lot of... that's probably a bit. On the College Board CED, under activism, they do mention... Abigail Adams, but I wouldn't really call her an activist group per se, because she's one person. I am blanking on any significant groups, at least. Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't think I can think of any off the top of my head. The Continental Congress I don't think would count necessarily. Let's see, what else could we really mention? I think for the most part, the biggest groups are going to be the Sons of Liberty, the Green Mountain Boys, and the Daughters of Liberty. Yeah, that's about it. Oh yeah, No, that's a pretty good question. Although I would bring up part B was about two groups, right, of colonists. Part C was just asking for a colonial response as a whole, not for a different um, group of activists. So you could have also talked about tarred and feathering tax collectors, um, kind of harassing the regulators or tax collectors. So yeah, the burning of the models of effigies. Yes. As for effigies, protesting effigies in general are a kind of response, right? They're similar to boycotts. They might not be a direct response, but they are a kind of response in the colonies. That would also work. Yeah, no problem. Any other questions? No problem. Okay, I'm gonna end the recording here.